Hello everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it's episode number 265 of Goulet Q&A. Got some good stuff to talk about today. Talking about ideal pen weights, how product reviews affect new product hype, and unusual vendor origin stories, one in particular. So yeah, some interesting stuff. Took off last week, in case you didn't notice. But we did have a great video of Garth Callahan, the Napkin Notes dad, talking about his battle with cancer and all the life lessons he's learned from that. It was really inspiring to hear him talk in person. He and I, are building a friendship now, even after the relationship that we've had. So it's really pretty cool. I've been writing napkin notes for my own kids, and they have been saving them and asking for them and stuff. So it's amazing just how quickly they latched onto it, which I really had no idea they would really take to it that well. So it's just really kind of cool how our stories have kind of intertwined. So it was really great to be able to share that with you and heard some really cool kind of inspiring stories of people that have been kind of affected by his talk. So you never know. It's kind of interesting. So it was kind of cool to break up the rhythm a little bit. You got a break from me. You got to see some of Garth. I don't know if you want a break from me, but after 265 of these things, I have to wonder, am I still bringing it? Am I still giving you what you want every week? But if you're watching this one, I would say probably so, because you know what you're getting at this point. So just on the personal front, summer's coming to a close. Our kids are in their last week of non-school, so they are excited a little bit. They're mourning it a little bit because they know that the work is coming, but they're also excited to be with their friends and all that kind of stuff. So it's fun. We're trying to do some special things this week with them. Arrange sleepovers with their friends and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting, but it does change mode for us a little bit, just me and Rachel, because our schedule, our rhythm changes a little bit with the school year, much like a lot of people's. And then just me personally, I've been really getting into, you can see them over here, I've got various like Rubik's Cubes and puzzles and stuff. So it's funny because I've been asked in the past about Q&A, like what other obsessions do you have? And I'm like, I'm deep on the pen thing, but I don't really have much else. And then wait a minute, I've gotten pretty deep into photography and cycling. I was into watches for a little bit, Lego Technics, and so when I really woodworking, and I was like, oh, and now it's puzzle solving. So. Obviously like the classic Rubik's Cube, which, little point in fact, a 3x3 Rubik's Cube has 43 quintillion different combinations that it can be done. That's more than there are grains of sand on the entire Earth. Isn't that crazy? So I can solve one now. I'm trying to get sub 30 seconds. That's like my next goal. Any of you cube nerds? So now I'm getting into like weird shaped morphing cubes, and I've got a 9x9 over here, and just having a blast with that. So yeah, I'm kind of off the deep end on that one, as is my good buddy Fig Boot on Pens. He and I are kind of feeding each other in that challenge. But anyway, on the pen front, so we've had some things that we've launched in the last couple of weeks, since I didn't do Q&A last week. Thought I would announce some things. So let's see here. We have the Aurora Duo Cart. So this is a Duo Cart kind of 2.0, because we had one before, so it's been redesigned. They took it down, redesigned it, and we are much happier with it. Before, they had an issue, and just being in full disclosure here, they had an issue where the feed was not seated all the way up next to the nib. That has been solved with this one. So it's a medium nib only. It's got a couple different colors. It comes with nice packaging, and I'm really pleased with the changes that they've made. It's got very much that vintage kind of feel, like a 1950s kind of feel. Comes in this nice box with a bottle of ink, which I took out, but anyway, comes with a converter and stuff like that. So they're really doing it right. So that's kind of cool. You can check those out now. What else have we got? The TWSBI Mini, all mint blue, which looks pretty darn similar to a version of I can't remember the exact name of it. I meant to look it up before Q&A, but I forgot. Full disclosure, a lot going on. It looks really, really similar to the kind of minty color TWSBI 580 all that was before. So if you like that color, great. If you wanted something vastly different from that, well, it's not that. So it's going to be pretty close. And then just for a color perspective, I also have the TWSBI Mini all blue as well as teal. So you can, oh gosh, let's see if I can hold all these up to each other. Let's see, can we get it? There we go. A little bit of glare. Okay, cool. So this is the mini mint blue right here. So you can see how similar that is to the 580 right here. And then this is the blue, and this is the turquoise, teal. There you go. So that's happening. What else we got? The Esterbrook Esty Honeycomb is here in 2 different colors. Very attractive pen, I must say. I like this kind of amber color, checkered pattern, not checkered, flecked pattern, that's what I'm trying to say. Looks really nice, 2 trim colors, silver and gold. If you're familiar with the Esterbrook, it's the same pen they've had before, just a new color. So that's pretty cool. Steel nibs, nice writer, solid pen. So we've got those. Retro 51 came out with a new fountain pen and rollerball called the Corsair, which we have. Robert Oster's got a couple new colors: Ocean, Cosmic Swirl, Blood Rose, and Violet Clouds. We got a Visconti new nib on the Breeze and Mirage Extra Fine, which is really like an extra fine. So you can check out Nib Nooks. I've done samples of that for comparison, but these are the new slightly smaller nibs, steel nibs that they have on those pens. But the Extra Fine, I was very pleased. Smooth writer. It's not a gusher. It's got steady flow, but it's not too stingy. And I think it's, if you're looking for like an extra fine performance from like a European pen, I think you'll be pretty happy with that one. So we now have those. And then we had this fun little situation with these Emerald of Chicken stickers. So this is a new thing. This came out of Goulet Nation. I think we're planning on doing it right now to tell the whole story on this, so I don't give it all away. But basically, Emerald of Chicken is a design that Whitney here, one of our photographers, came up with this cute little chicken sticker because, long story short, Emerald of Chivor, the 1670 Herbon color, got mistyped in Goulet Nation, our Facebook group, as Emerald of Chicken, got kind of auto-corrected. And the whole group just kind of blew up and was like, oh, Emerald of Chicken, that's so funny. And so it was kind of like a little inside joke, a little nod to Goulet Nation there. So we came up with this chicken sticker, and there you go, now we have it. So stickers are kind of like a new thing for us. Apparently, y'all like stickers? I don't know. But obviously we give those out with our orders, so we were like, hey, let's try this sticker thing. And so, you know, we're experimenting, we're trying new stuff and trying to make things interesting. So that was a fun little event that we got to do there for the community. All right, let's get into some pen and writing questions, shall we? First one is Aisha _0222 on Instagram. What are the pens at either side of the weight spectrum, and what is Brian's sweet spot? So our pens range from the Platinum Carbon Desk Pen, which is the lightest pen that we currently have on our site, at 9 grams, which is really pretty light. And it's a long pen too. So obviously it'll weigh a little more if you have a converter in there. It doesn't come with a converter. So if you add one, that'll add a little bit of weight to it, but still that is what it's capable of weighing from the factory at least. And the heaviest pen that we currently have is the Jinhao Dragon, which comes in this beautiful silver version as well as a gold version if you really want to make yourself stand out in a meeting or something. This pen is very heavy, 99 grams. And so this is total body weight. So this is cap and body. Sorry, total pen weight, cap and body, which technically with this pen you can post it on the back and you can write with the full weight of it. With this one though, the cap doesn't really post. I mean, it sort of can, but not really. So it's actually 7 grams when you're just holding the body of the pen, which is fairly light, but it's actually not the lightest pen body we have. So, you know, because you're talking about, you know, pens and you're actually writing with them, which is gonna feel the lightest while you're writing with it. If you're talking about body weight only, if you have a pen like the Diplomat Magnum, if you just have the body, not counting the converter, of course, you are gonna be at 5 grams. The Kaweco Classic Sport, or some version of the Classic Sport that is made of plastic at least, the body alone is going to weigh 5 grams. 6 grams, sorry. The Pilot Explorer and the Pilot Parallel, those only weigh 6 grams in the body as well. And so the Jinhao Dragon has the heaviest body only at 60 grams, which is really pretty darn heavy, even as it is. It's not technically the heaviest pen we've ever carried. The heaviest pen we ever carried was the Keras Customs ink, which was made of copper, and that thing was 120 grams in its full weight. It was a monster, but we don't have that anymore because Keras Customs is now just selling direct. So these pens, going from the 9 gram to the 99 gram, they are kind of on the extremes, of course. And I think everybody's sweet spot's going to vary a little bit, but you asked me specifically what mine is, so I will share my thoughts. You know, I tend to personally not like pens that are too light. I mean, they're perfectly usable. Of course, I can use them, but it's just not my preference. I like to feel a little bit of heft in my hands. Of course, I have big hands. I'm a pretty strong dude, so I like to feel it around. I can feel my pen in my hand, and I'm not bothered by a heavy weight quite as much as maybe some others are, and that's fine. So in terms of the pens that we have, we actually have a cool faceted search on our site where you can see how many pens we have in different like gram weight ranges. So looking at like the 10 to 19 gram weight, we've got like 250 or so pens in that range. Now this is a very loose kind of adjustment, or loose guess as to what pens might be most popular. It's really more what we have, what we're offering, but you know, over time, it's kind of like, what are you buying? That's what we're offering. And so it's some indication at least, but the 10 to 19 gram is the biggest offering we have, followed by the 20 to 29 gram, and then 30 to 39 gram, 40 to 49 gram, and just kind of goes off from there, right? So my personal sweet spot kind of ends up falling in that 20 to 29 gram range. It really depends on the pen, the type of material, and all these other things. I'm not like completely biased or unbiased towards any given pen based solely on its weight, you know, but I do tend to kind of gravitate towards that 20 to 29 gram range. This covers things like the Vanishing Point. This covers my Visconti Homo Sapiens without the cap, and a lot of pens that I tend to use on a little more regular basis. Lamy 2000, Posted and whatnot. I don't mind something heavier if it's a desk pen. You know, a pen like the Il Magnifico is kind of up there. Visconti, their Torpedo is really up there. You're looking like 42 grams for these. The Kaweco Supra is up there too, at 42 grams. These I don't mind having around just to pick up and write a couple of notes with and kind of look at them. And pens that are that heavy usually are made of some kind of metal or marble in this case. So they're going to be pretty tough and durable material, so they can be carried around, tossed around a little bit. But still, it's like you're going to feel that weight, especially in your hand. I've tried to do long writing sessions with my Il Magnifico, and it's a little rough, I'm going to be quite honest with you, with something that heavy, 42 grams in your hand. And that's just the body only on that pen. That weighs you down a little bit, and it can tire your hand out. So you got to find what's right for you. But yeah, mine tends to be in that maybe lower to mid 20s. I think is the sweet spot. So there you go. Enjoy. Next question is from Grow Home on Twitter. In video pen reviews, they often comment on the pen's ability to reverse write. Why would anyone ever do this? So reverse writing, you're talking about not like reverse in terms of, you know, taking the pen and obviously flipping it reverse. You're talking about, you know, the nib needs to be with the shiny part towards the sky, but you can flip it upside down so that the feed is towards the sky and it'll still write in most cases. The reason why you would do this, and I've talked about this in Q&A before, but I'll cover it again here just in case you haven't seen that before, is because when you flip the nib like that, it has a less ink flow coming out of the top of the nib. Generally speaking, it's a little less surface area there, so your line is going to write a little finer. It's going to put a little less ink down, and in practicality, what that helps with is if you are having to write on paper that you have no control over it and you don't want it to bleed through or be really broad or anything like that, you can flip it over and you can write a finer line with less ink in situations where it would warrant it. Now, are you going to want to write with a pen like that for months and months? Probably not, because that's not really how the pens are designed. They're designed to be written with the feed on the underside of the nib. Mainly because if you write with a lot of pressure, with the nib flipped in reverse like that, that feed is right up against that nib. You know, if you have the feed and nib in the normal arrangement, you know, using this Pilot Explorer as an example, the nib is on top of the feed, and if you're writing with pressure on it, the nib can flex up a little bit away from the feed. If you flip it over, it has nowhere to go because that feed is pressing down on it as you're putting pressure on the page, and you could actually bend that tip if you write with it too hard. So will that happen over time? If you write with really light pressure, theoretically not, but it would be easier to damage the nib in reverse writing. So that's one thing that you kind of have to watch out for. Another thing to watch out for is the fact that not all pen companies are grinding their nibs to be comfortable or to really be tuned to write upside down. A lot of times, sure, you'll end up having that situation. It's usually going to feel a little scratchier, a little rougher if you flip it over like that. But a lot of times you will be able to flip it over and it's just fine. But it's not like a guaranteed thing, just because that's not something that most pen companies really have on their radar. It's really kind of a hack, right? So it's not something that, for me, like as a authorized retailer who's also making videos, I don't do a lot of the videos where I like flip it over and say, well, this is how the pen is going to write upside down. I can't really predict that. A lot of other bloggers and reviewers and stuff like that, they're really reviewing like the one pen they have. They're not having to like speak on behalf of what you can expect and then have to customer service after the fact for whatever it is they say in a video. So they have the freedom to review and say pretty much whatever they want and do whatever they want, which is great. Like I love anyone who's making pen videos, trust me. And I know many of the most popular ones, and that's great. Trust me, I have true respect for how much time it takes and the passion that fuels their desire to make these videos. So they can talk about whatever the heck they want. Like, that's totally their freedom. I think there's a couple of factors of why they would do that. One, it's just kind of cool and interesting. It's like, hey, yeah, did you know you can flip the nib? That's kind of cool. If it does something different, if it writes a little bit different, that's good to know. So it's just, as a pen reviewer, you just kind of want to explore every aspect of the pen. So that's probably part of what fuels it. It's not that everybody's doing that, but if you're watching that video, it's nice to know. It's like, oh, that's a little tidbit that I didn't know before. Also, part of it, I think, is probably because I imagine if they're like us, most of the time when they publish a video, somebody's going to ask whatever the given question is over and over and over again. So every video they post, they're probably hearing, hey, how does it write when it's reverse flipped? And like maybe they leave it in the comments or something, but it's like after a certain number of videos that you've produced, that you're going to get asked that question. So you're like, I'm just going to put it in there. That way I don't have to get asked that question 5 times and respond in the comments. It's just going to be there in the video. So there might be some of that. It might not be everybody is really using it that way, but there are a very enthusiastic vocal minority of people that are going to want to know that from that video. So why not include it, right? We're in that kind of situation with eyedropper conversions. Like every pen that we ever carry, we have to know, is it eyedropper convertible? And it's kind of like an inside joke even within our vendor relationships. When there's like a new pen that's coming out or being presented or whatever, that's like one of our first questions, because a lot of times we don't have like a final sample or the final pen in our hands when we're told about something that's going to be coming. Which is both good and bad. It's bad because we don't have the final thing, and it would be great to know. It's good in that we know what's coming so we can prepare and plan and these types of things. But the thing is, whenever we're told something about something new, if it's just like a different color of an existing pen and we already know what it is, that's one thing. But if it's like a new model of pen, we always have to ask all the different things, like, what nib size does it have, what's the material made of, how much does it weigh, how much is it, and we may not have all the information. In fact, usually we don't have all the information at the time that we're told about something new that's coming out. But that's one of the things that we always say is like, is this going to be eyedropper convertible? Because we're going to need to know it. So anyway, it kind of falls into that category. Not everybody's doing that, but those who do want to do it, that will make or break the experience of the pen for them. So that's probably what it is. Me personally, I never really flip my pen in practicality while I'm writing. I've done it maybe a couple times. I've honestly done it more to answer questions that you have as customers or in comments or whatever, or just to do it as a pen reviewer, so to speak, than I do in actual practicality of I'm a human carrying around a pen and I need to be in a situation where I flip it. It's just not really how I use it. But anyway, that's something kind of interesting and quirky that is out there in the pen world. So there you go. Hopefully that gives you some perspective. All right. Next from ArcImage on Twitter. Is there a common thread pitch for the section or barrel? I know they're different, but can one replace the section of one pen with the barrel of another across manufacturers? Okay, so like an example of this, I'm going to grab a couple of random pens. Like Esterbrook SD comes out and you're like, hey, wouldn't it be kind of cool if I could put, I'm really just grabbing two random pens off my desk, if I could put the grip section for Kaweco Supra on my Esterbrook SD. So theoretically, oh yes, get a little ink on my fingers. Thank you. It would help if I didn't try to put the cap down on its rounded part. That's why it's falling over like that. Okay, what you're talking about here, for those of you that don't know all the specific terminology, the thread pitch, so there's threads in here. So this part is going to thread into the body of the pen. Of course, the body has threads that thread onto the cap, right? So this is the grip section threads, the threads here, and then there's threads on the inside of the body here that mate up to it. Well, you have a lot of different factors here. You have the pitch of the threads, which is, you know, kind of the angle and the number of threads that there are. TPI, or threads per inch, is a measurement that's out there. You also have, you know, like a thickness of threads, a spacing. You can get a single thread that goes around. You can end up with multiple double thread or a triple, quadruple thread, depending on how many points the thread starts. So that can affect how you know, quickly it's going to twist together. A multi-pitch thread is going to be better for a cap because it won't require as many rotations to close it. There's really just so many, and then you like the physical size difference of the different pen parts. There's really so many different factors that make up something like a detail of, you know, the threading of a grip onto a barrel. The short answer to your question is no. There is no universal standard whatsoever in the industry about which pen grips thread onto which barrels, even amongst a single manufacturer. If you have a pen like, you know, a Kaweco Classic Sport, and you have an Ice Sport, and you have a, you know, actually, I don't even know if the metal versions, if you could thread a plastic grip onto the metal. Generally, you don't want to mix dissimilar materials too much if you don't have to either, but that's beyond the scope of this question here. So yes, if it's like the exact same model of pen, you can swap it between that. But generally speaking, there's just way too much going on that makes it non-universal, that you really can't rely on that basically at all. It's more of an exception than it is a rule to be able to swap between any pen models, let alone any pen manufacturers. In fact, I can't name you a single pen manufacturer where you can thread one grip onto a different grip or a different barrel from another manufacturer. It just really doesn't work like that. Even if you could, the additional thing that you run into, and I use this pen because it's a clear one, the additional problem you run into is if you had any difference in length here or diameter of the grip, you may run into issues being able to fit it into the cap of that given pen. So even if I was to thread a different grip on here, so it's just, there's really just so much that it's just not going to work like that. Yeah, as much as you may not want to hear that, that's really kind of how it works. So yeah, did I cover everything? I think so. Boom, done. All right, I got a troubleshooting question here. This is from Nancy RHM on Twitter. I've turned a Preppy into an eyedropper pen using your technique, silicone grease plus O-ring. I've noticed some ink in the thread area. Is this normal? It's not leaking. This will be a very short answer. Yes, that is normal. Especially if you go light on the grease here. If you've seen this video, it's one of my oldest videos. I shot that back in my garage, back when we were working in the garage way long ago. The lighting is terrible and everything, but the concept is the same, so I haven't remade the video. Anyway, it's funny if you watch it because of just how early days that video was. But anyway, so what happens when you're doing this eyedropper conversion in the video is I put an O-ring on here, which is an O-ring we still sell, a little bit of silicone grease on these threads. You fill the body with ink here. You don't tilt it like this, you leave it like that. You thread it onto here, and then you have an O-ring, which acts as a stopgap for the ink, and it has silicone grease, which also acts as a stopgap. Depending on how you put that silicone grease on here, you may get some ink that'll work its way into the threads. But really, as long as there's any point in these threads where the silicone grease stops it all up, it doesn't matter if there's ink on half the threads or whatever. As long as it can't break that barrier, you're going to be just fine. And then you still have the O-ring, which acts as its own barrier. So you technically could put the O-ring and no silicone grease, have ink all up in those threads, and it wouldn't be a problem unless you unscrewed the pen, or unless you like really jostled it around a lot and it came a little loose or something. So I like to do both just as kind of a stopgap, but technically speaking, you really only need one or the other. So yeah, you're just fine. It's not gonna, as long as it's not leaking out of the pen, you're in good shape. Like, mission accomplished. Another thing, while I'm talking about the Preppy, because I do get asked this from time to time, because it's got a clear grip and you can see it in here, a lot of times people think that something's wrong because the ink will be in the feed and it'll like press up against the plastic on the grip and it'll look really kind of splotchy. Just like any demonstrator pen that has a clear grip, you'll see kind of splotches of ink at times, and people think that like the pen's leaking or something's wrong with it. That is also 100% normal. It happens on every pen. You just happen to see it when you have a clear grip. So that's perfectly fine. As long as you literally don't have like ink dripping out of the pen and getting in places that it shouldn't. An eyedropper conversion, ink is gonna go everywhere, but stay up in the pen. So that's the point. You're in good shape. Keep on rocking. All right, I got a business question here. Couple of them actually, 3 of them actually, I think, yes. This first one is from Often a Nomad on Instagram. Will Goulet pens ever have an in-house nib grinder or calligrapher? Interesting question. I've talked about this a bit, but I will expound. Calligrapher? No, that would be cool for like content creation, stuff like that maybe, but calligraphy as a trade really makes sense more if you're doing, you know, in the most stereotypical fashion, like wedding invitations, or some kind of, restaurant menus in a really high-end restaurant, or, you know, really fancy invitations for like, I mean, like the White House has a calligrapher, right, for doing really fancy invitations for diplomatic events and stuff like that. We don't really do any commissioned art stuff here. We sell products. We don't really do commissioned artwork. So yes, if somebody had calligraphy skills here, we would be able to put that to use, but would it make sense to have a full-time person doing that? Not at all. In anything that we're currently doing. Theoretically, we could work with somebody who does that and maybe freelance and have some kind of working relationship there to help produce content and use products and stuff like that. But even then, like somebody who like truly does calligraphy, they're usually doing it with a pointed pen or an oblique pen holder that uses calligraphy ink, and it's really completely different products than what we sell. Even though it seems really similar, it's actually quite different. No, long and short, that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But for a nib grinder, yes, that would make a lot of sense. Soon, likely not. It's actually been more complicated than you think to do that. One huge factor, actually, not even related to the actual nib grinding work, has been getting the blessings from our manufacturers. So we are authorized retailers for every brand that we carry. And one really important part of that is we want to honor any warranty stuff or any service, education related things that our manufacturers wish us to honor, because we represent their brand in a way by carrying their products. So we want to make sure that we're not doing anything that's against their wishes. And then doing like nib alterate, like it's one thing to tune or adjust a nib and be able to like troubleshoot and tweak and stuff like that. We've gotten some formal training in that respect, both Drew and I, and we've passed it around to the rest of our team. And so we have the ability to basically make pens as they should be, but not altering or adjusting them away from what the manufacturer intends. It's a different situation when you're talking about grinds and alterations and stuff like that. It's an approach that I'm taking very systematically towards our manufacturers to share a vision with them of basically what you all keep asking about, which is doing in-house nib grinds. You can buy a new pen, get it ground, have a new pen with a custom grind delivered to you, and not have to basically take it aftermarket and get it done from a Nibmeister. Now we have good Nibmeister working relationships with several different Nibmeisters, Mark Bacchus, Gina Salarino from Custom Nib Studio. I've had some training from Richard Binder. We're very friendly with Mike Masayama. Haven't worked together in any capacity, but met at several pen shows and spent a little time together. And we're happy to refer people, to any of these Nibmeisters for after nib work. There's a couple other retailers who do custom grind stuff who kind of like started out more on the nib grinding side, got into doing some retailing, and they kind of do that stuff themselves as well, kind of have organically sprung up that way. Because we have such a presence like we do in the community and we represent these brands, I want to be really intentional about how we would do that. So I've asked several brands, and some of them have been like, okay, yes, you got to have proper disclaimers, because basically when you're doing a grind, you're altering the pen from what the manufacturer made it to be. So the manufacturer can't then go out and warranty that thing. It's no different than if you buy a new car and you change out parts of the engine and you put new wheels on it and all this kind of stuff. Well, that dealership is not going to honor a manufacturer warranty on a different thing that you've put on that car. You know what I mean? It's really kind of the same thing like that. So when you're getting something custom done, you just have to kind of know that, like, okay, I'm taking this into my own hands here, and it's no longer, I'm not going to complain about how this nib works to Visconti as an example, because Mark Bacchus has done a custom grind on it. If I have an issue, I'm going to go to Mark Bacchus, or I'm going to go to Goulet Pens, who sold Mark Bacchus's grind, and go to them if there is a nib issue at this point. So with proper disclaimers and stuff like that, brands like Visconti have said, okay, yes, you can do that. Other brands, they get really hesitant about doing that. And for me personally, I understand why, because you're, as a manufacturer, you can really lose control of the brand perception without the proper messaging and proper way of going about doing that. If you just say, yeah, whatever, free for all, everybody can grind whatever they want, and then somebody buys a custom grind, but then they give it as a gift and it goes somewhere else, and it's not understood at that point that pen has been altered at some point. Then it just becomes, oh, this, I'll use Pilot as an example, like, oh, this Pilot pen, the nib is terrible on this, and then that's kind of the reputation that starts to go around, is somebody's doing alterations and it's not what Pilot wants, and now that gets tied into Pilot's brand. So you can see where it gets a little complicated from a branding perspective from these manufacturers. So a lot of them are very hesitant to allow and say, yes, we want, allow you as an authorized retailer to do that to a product. So there's a little bit of visioning and sharing with them about, like, okay, we can have proper messaging and disclaimers to be able to do that, but we've met some resistance on many different brands from doing that. So it's not quite as simple as it may seem to just start offering grinds on everything, because we want to make sure that we are going to approach it right. But that's almost kind of ancillary, honestly, because we don't have capacity to do in-house grinds anyway. So the training that I've had some training on grinds and stuff like that. So I know all the basics, and it's not super complicated. It takes a bit of practice. I've ruined a few nibs, and I've ground plenty of really good ones just in my spare time. Never ground anything for sale. That's a little different. And it got to the point where I was like grinding, and I was like, what am I doing with all these nibs? So I just kind of have this huge stock of nibs, not huge, but 40 or 50 nibs or something like that I've ground that are just kind of sitting there waiting for something to be done. They're really just practice nibs on my part. But even still, like, I got 2 kids. I'm running this company. Like, I really can't be grinding nibs all the time. It's kind of like a fun passion thing for me, and to just solidify the skills and education so I can pass it on internally on our team. But in all practicality, I can't be a full-time Nibmeister, and we really don't have anybody here that has those skills and that time to do it, because the truth is it takes some knowledge to know how to do it. You got to have good acumen with your hands. You got to have a certain level of just skill, of just talent to be able to do it. But largely, what it boils down to is time. You gotta pay your dues. It's a trade craft. It's like anything else. It's like improving your handwriting. It's like learning how to, I don't know, do anything. Woodworking, I also do that. It's like doing photography. It's like dancing or playing a musical instrument. You can learn the fundamentals, but largely, to do it well, especially well enough where somebody's willing to pay you money to do it, you got to practice a lot. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have internally on doing it is not only do we have to kind of get graces and permission from our manufacturers to be able to do it, but then we would have to pass on that education, build up someone within our team who has capacity to do that, train them, have those skills, and then give them a ton of time to be able to practice. So it's something we haven't quite tackled yet. It's on my like bucket list as a like dream goal for our company to be able to do that. We just haven't been able to make it happen yet. That said, we are looking to internally train our team, Drew and I, with the knowledge we have, so we can just as a whole company just be smarter about how nibs work, because that's only going to help us and help you as well. But in the meantime, what we're doing is we're trying to work with other nibmeisters like Mark Bacchus and others who we're going to try to talk to in the future too. So that could be really interesting, kind of pairing up, partnering up with nibmeisters. I've thought about doing that a lot in the past, but most of the time we run into an issue because they don't have capacity. A lot of them are doing it in their spare time. It's kind of like a side hustle. They work a full-time gig. They do nib grinding stuff only at shows or on the shows and on the weekends and at nights and stuff. That kind of, they fit in between their family and other commitments and stuff. So they just don't have capacity to take on, commercial work like we would be asking of them. So we haven't been able to do that with much consistency. So it's something that I'm hoping for the future that we can change until we are able to offer something in-house, which I eventually would love to be able to partner up with other people who are doing grinds, give them some love, some exposure, send some work their way, partner up with them with the graces of our manufacturers and do it. So that's how we're trying to do it. It's taking a lot longer than I would love to. I'd love to just snap my fingers and make it happen like right away, but it is kind of cool to be able to offer that even as we are. So yeah, there we go. And then of course, if we had somebody that had all the time and talent and had already done it and would love to come and work for our company, I would do that in like a hot second. But there's nobody that I know currently. I know most of the people that are out there grinding nibs, in a fullish enough time capacity to be able to just plug right in and do it for us. But if you happen to know somebody or you happen to be a nibmeister that would love a full-time gig with us, the door is always open. But it's not something that like realistically I think we're going to have anytime soon, just because people have lives and families and they're remote, and it really needs to be somebody on site if we're going to do it in like full gusto. So that's kind of our situation right now. I'm aspiring towards that for the future, but it's complicated. But I am kind of super curious of what custom grinds that you all would want to see. We've done, at this point, as I was shooting this video, we've done cursive italic, or Mark Bacchus he calls it CSI, his cursive smooth italic mediums. We've also done a couple of cursive smooth italic broads, which were not as popular as the mediums, as I would expect. I would expect that the things that you don't get to see as often would be more popular. We're considering architects, we're considering like superfines, we're considering, a variety of other things. So I really partly wanted to take this question. For those of you who are interested in some custom grind stuff, what would you want to see us offer on what pens and what grinds? That would really be helpful, because there are so many options when you get into custom stuff. It's hard to know what to offer if we don't have the ability to kind of just do whatever we want. We have to be methodical about it. So I would love to know in the comments what you think about that. Cool? All right, Stephen G. in his email said, without getting into proprietary info or sales numbers, I was wondering if you'd be able to discuss how to, or what extent, okay, sorry, you got a lot of slashes in your question here. I was wondering if you'd be able to discuss how, to what extent, if the customer reviews on the site affect hype, demand, sales, etc. Sometimes I see posts like, I ordered this Konpeki, but I don't like blue ink. I only like red, 0 stars. And it's pretty obvious the writer is just a crank. But I've also seen times where a string of seemingly legit bad reviews appear to derail a highly anticipated launch. Okay, happy to talk about that, not in any like super specifics, partly because I don't really have any super specifics around it. Even if I did, obviously there's proprietary kind of stuff, blah, 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 blah. But I figured I could give you some context in here. So product reviews are great. I love product reviews just as a human shopper out there in the e-commerce landscape myself. When I'm looking to buy something new, like a new Rubik's Cube per se, I will often use product reviews as a way to learn more about the product, see if it's any good, especially if it's something where I know it's a very enthusiast-based community. If I'm looking at something like lawnmowers, okay, people aren't maybe as invested in leaving detailed reviews of a lawnmower they bought. Well, maybe they are. But generally speaking, I'll look at sites, actually a really good site, no affiliation whatsoever, is called the Wirecutter. So I recently got turned on to that one for like home appliances and things like that. So I had to like buy a new refrigerator. Got a really good one on there. I was really happy with a kitchen mop that I bought there, and a stick vacuum that I bought. All that were like highly rated. Anyway, it's like a Consumer Reports type website. So yes, so I will use something like that for the more commodity type products to vet. But if I'm looking for something like pens or Rubik's Cubes or something else that's like very enthusiast based, the product reviews to me mean really a lot. So for us, I love having authentic product reviews of people that are invested in leaving a review and are truthful about the product, whatever that may be. You know, I love ones that people share their own experience, their own expectations, all that kind of. That gives me personally, business aside, personally, that gives me so much context. Because like you said in your example here, if somebody's like, I only like red, 0 stars, you're like, oh, okay, I can completely ignore that review because that person just doesn't have the same perspective on this product that I do. Great. I will ignore that, you know, but then you read other ones and it just gives you so much context besides just a general star rating, right? So for us, you know, I would say they do impact sales to a degree. It's hard to say how much because it's going to vary a lot based on situations, right? Like it's going to be based on how many reviews there are, the quality of the reviews. If it's just star ratings and nothing else, I don't really know how much that makes a difference. Sure. On some sites like Amazon and stuff like that, like star ratings are everything, right? eBay, you know, these types of sites where there's a lot of different sellers all being directly compared next to each other and you get seller ratings and stuff like that, like star rankings are everything. And you may or may not dive in and read the details on a lot of different reviews. But those reviews really, really matter. And they definitely matter for us too. You know, I don't know how much, you all can tell me in the comments, like how much does a 4.3 versus a 4.5 star rating on 2 different pens really matter to you? Like it probably matters if it's like a 2 versus a 4.5. But do the slight decimals really matter? And the truth is a lot of our products are like in that 4 to 4.5 range. You know, to get something that's like all 5s is really quite difficult. But to get something that's like in that 4 to 5 range, you're like, okay, yes, this is an acceptable product, I know. And then you basically read the details of what people say in the reviews to get additional context around it, right? Like that's how I am shopping. That's how I'm perceiving a lot of you are shopping when you're shopping for these specific pens. So for me, you know, I love to have as much context as possible, and I encourage that in any reviews that you're able to leave. I really don't love reviews that are just like 1 star with no context or 5 star with no context. I mean, obviously good star ratings are good, bad star ratings are bad to a degree, but we do pay attention to a degree to the reviews that we have on our site. There are a lot of them. We have 4,500 plus different, you know, SKUs, different products, different arrangements of products. So that's a lot to keep track of. So we might have hundreds of reviews at a time that are just coming in, like it's like a stream of them coming in all the time, which is great, especially with new products coming and stuff like that. However, we can't read every single word from every single review. It's just not practical for us. But we do have kind of alarms and summaries and keywords that get jumped out at us. We got like a whole back-end system for reviews on our site that helps not only to manage it and send out automated emails asking for your feedback and this type of stuff, but it also helps to give us kind of reports and stuff like that. So if we see that a certain product is trending downward, or if we see on the back end that there's a certain keyword like leaks that keeps coming up on a given product, we can investigate that. Obviously we're hearing about it through phone and email and live chat and social and all these other ways, but that's just one more channel that we can pay attention to, especially because it's like on the product page. So that's like, gets our attention, right? Now, sometimes, like kind of in the example you gave in the question, there can be people that kind of use alarming language or very extreme, I don't want to say extreme language, but like extreme, I'll call it extreme language around their given situation to try to get our attention, right? Like that's not really necessary for us because we're paying attention, we're happy to help, we're always here. But on a lot of other sites, the customer service may not be super proactive. They may not be the easiest to get a hold of. So you might take an approach towards the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. Let me leave a 1-star rating and say this is the worst product ever. I'm never going to shop with them. You should all, send in hate mail to this company because then I know I'm going to get my return processed or whatever. Like you may have had so many of these experiences at other e-commerce places. Every now and then, this isn't a lot, but every now and then we'll get a review that'll come through that'll kind of be like that. So we have flags and certain indicators and stuff when we get like really, 1-star reviews and stuff like that come up that we will pay attention to. And then we can actually reach out to whoever left that review and say, hey, this really sounds like you had a bad situation here. Can you give me more context or is there a way we can make it right? Was this a random defect and we need to make it right and take care of a warranty type thing? Or was it just something crazy happened? Or sometimes people buy stuff at a different place and they get confused and they leave a review on our site and we gotta follow up on that, and all kinds of things can happen. But either way, we care. Like we care about how our products are represented, how you all are viewing the things that we have on our site, and we want to portray them fairly and accurately, however that may be. Now that said, getting more to like the heart of your question here is if you have like a string of seemingly legit bad reviews, can that affect a highly anticipated launch? The answer is yes and no. Obviously, bad reviews, especially if they're very legit and it speaks to something that's actually wrong with a given product, that will get noticed. That will, obviously impact the sales of something. And it may impact whether we even choose to carry it anymore. That's happened before, not with a ton of products, but it absolutely has happened before where we've had such pushback or bad reviews on a product that we're like, okay, this is not a good, I'll call it an at-home good product. Sometimes we carry something, we try to test it, but when, we have especially lower priced pens where there could be hundreds or even thousands of them that get out there into the world, and then everybody uses them in all kinds of different scenarios, and we find that half the time the way that people tend to be using them is not ideal. The rating can go down and it can be a total deal breaker. The one thing that is really tough in the pen industry is everybody uses things so differently and for such specific reasons of their own needs. The ratings can really be all over the place for a variety of reasons. So we have our own gut and our own kind of historical information to point towards when we think a product is going to be good or bad. And we talk about that constantly when we're carrying products, dropping products, and so on, informing our vendors about what matters to you all. The product reviews are a huge data point for us about that. So we love to have the truest and most honest feedback in there that is not like so extreme one way or another that it's meant to kind of warrant and get our attention. Though, I understand if that happens. But just, being honest and practical about that is really good. Now that said, negative feedback inspires people way more often than positive feedback to leave reviews on most e-commerce sites. I'm actually pleasantly surprised with how generally positive our reviews are, or positive mixed with with reality, you know, like, hey, I really like this pen, but there's this one drawback, da 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 da. It wasn't a total deal breaker, but I feel you should know about it. I love those types of reviews because it's so contextual and it really helps you to make an informed buying decision, which, you know, we're all about being honest here. Being honest is one of our core values. So we're never like looking at a one-star review and saying, oh, we're gonna take this off because it's gonna hurt the sales of the pen. Like, no, we don't do that. You know, there may be situations where we take a review off for other reasons, if it's irrelevant or if it's profane or if it's unfair, if it's somebody's just, we run into this every now and then, somebody is cursing the mail carrier that they have and leave a one-star review because the overall experience wasn't ideal, not related to the product that they're leaving the review on, not even related to our service as a company necessarily, but because of the specific situation of the third-party mail carrier that's delivering the last mile of that product, they just get really upset and they leave a terrible review. That kind of stuff is less than helpful if you're actually looking to buy a product, because you probably don't have that same mail carrier that they do. It's not really relevant to you, but anyway, so we do filter things as appropriate with kind of industry standards, and that's part of why we use, you know, like a formal review system, is they can guide us towards, you know, what is common practice and stuff like that for e-commerce reviews. So that's where we kind of land with that. So for us, the more reviews we have on any given product, the better off it is, good, bad, or otherwise. We just love to have that information. So if you have the time or the inspiration to leave any reviews for any products you've bought from us, we super appreciate it. And if you've got it and you've like logged into your account and stuff like that, you can even show as a verified purchaser, which only helps to the credibility that much more. Super awesome. But basically, we just want you to leave a lot of reviews. So there you go. Oh, one last thing touching on that, because you said, you know, can product reviews derail a highly anticipated launch? A lot of times the products that we're launching are brand new. People haven't used them before. So whatever review, there's usually not a lot of reviews. So it's not often that it will like derail a launch kind of at the start. It's more like if there is a launch and then everybody gets it in and it's not what people thought it was going to be, and then a wave of reviews comes in maybe a month or two later, that can really inform what happens. That's kind of normal, like that happens with every product. But obviously if there's something that launches and it ends up being universally not as loved as maybe some other things, then it's not that it derails a launch necessarily. It could institute returns. It could, you know, we'll always make it right. But yeah, it can absolutely affect things. But it's seldom that, like, when we use the word launch around here, we're thinking like the day that we launch it and shortly thereafter. So the reviews largely aren't a part of that necessarily. It's more the education we have on the page and the hype that's kind of out there in the community. The product reviews would be more like people who are looking to buy it within that first month or 60 days after something launches, or whether someone who's bought it at launch wants to return it. They may look at the product reviews and say, oh, other people are having this problem too, you know, maybe. But honestly, I think you would hear about that more on social media than you would necessarily through a product review on the site. But anyway, so those are my thoughts on it. Yeah, it can affect it, but largely it's not like every pen is swinging wildly based on the reviews, because we do a pretty intentional job of curating what products we carry and why. So I think largely it's stuff that is generally people are going to be pretty happy with. All right, last question that I have. I'm going to try to tell this story in as little time as possible here. This is from Lee S. on Facebook. What's the most unusual vendor relationship you've needed to strike up in order to bring excellent products to us? It might be a pen or an ink company, but I'm thinking there has to be a great story about some repair tool or accessory you've sourced creatively. Tell us a good, true story. The honest truth is a lot of them are, you know, quasi-interesting stories if you're in the retail world maybe, or manufacturing world, but most of them are relatively uneventful. Something might be like, oh, we went to source this out and then we found that that wasn't a reliable supplier, so we found another supplier that ended up kind of being better. And it happened to be cheaper. Great, like we can offer it a lower price now than we were originally intending to. Okay, great. End of story. There's other ones where it's like the story gets kind of interesting, but maybe not so much in the most positive way, so I wouldn't really want to brag about it too much. Just because there's always logistics behind the scenes that can make situations a challenge for us, or make it kind of unusual, but maybe wouldn't be fair to say per se. Largely though, it's a lot of the stuff is kind of boring enough where I wouldn't really call it a great story. There are a ton of fascinating people that we get to work with, who we get to know and kind of sell their products. Thinking specifically like the biggest personalities in the pen world, like Nathan Tardif of Noodlers and Dante Del Vecchio, pen designer, and people like that are really interesting. But I think one of the most interesting and probably relevant specifically to Goulet pens over our history has been Edison pens and our relationship with Brian and Andrea Gray. Edison is technically our longest standing vendor relationship that we've had. Now, we credit Exaclair, the distributor for Clairefontaine, Rhodia, Geribon, Exacompta, Quo Vadis, with being our first vendor with fountain pen related stuff. And that is true. Really, they were the ones who helped us to make that pivot. But a little told story, oft not told story, and some new stuff to share, which is why I'm getting into this here. For those of you willing to stick around, you'll get to hear a little insight of history that I haven't really shared before. So Edison Pens is technically our longest standing vendor relationship because I had actually known Brian Gray back when I was making pens, before we got into fountain pen stuff at all. So in my pen making days, he was one of the people who crossed over, right? So there's a lot of hobbyists who get into pen making because they're woodworkers, or they gift pens to people they know because they just like to make them. They sell them at craft shows and stuff like that. They're not really running a business. It's more of a hobby that pays for itself, which is exactly where I started. It's exactly where Brian Gray started. So Brian Gray really had a similar story to what we were doing. It was nuanced, of course, but basically started off as a hobby. Life disrupted. He ended up deciding to go full time with it, scaled up, got some automated equipment, started out woodworking, hand turning pens, really started to build a brand, got some more, heavy duty machinery, started designing his own pens, getting away from the kit pens and making his own designs and stuff like that, really building a brand for himself, doing some custom work. That was actually the path that I had in mind that we were going to do with the Goulet Pen Company. That's why we're actually called the Goulet Pen Company, because back in early 2009, before we were into fountain pens, I was the craftsman making the pens, so I named it the Goulet Pen Company after myself so that I could, build the brand as a craftsman, much like you had in the days of old when you had trade craftsmen that would name the company after themselves, right? Rachel and I together were doing this company, and we named it after our last name. So it's funny, but I was aware of him because of his reputation in the pen community. I started to explore, and I discovered the Fountain Pen Network, but I actually discovered just wisps of Edison pens on a different pen forum that's called the International Association of Pen Turners, penturners.org. If you are a pen kit maker or a woodworker or something like that, you may already be familiar with that site. If you're not, you should go there because it's pretty interesting. But it's people that make kit pens, and they do resin pours, and they do all kinds of different interesting things. It's not a fountain pen focused site at all. There's like some very small fountain pen knowledge on there, but I'd heard about Brian on that forum just because he was known as one of the ones who crossed over and made a full-time business out of this hobby, right? And then when I discovered the Fountain Pen Network, as I was exploring, because it was just very organic, like I was on the penturners.org, and I was hearing about fountain pens because you can buy a lot of rollerball pen kits that have a fountain pen grip section that you can just screw in there, and you can make the same pen basically and just convert it into a fountain pen. So I was like, fountain pen, well, that's kind of, it was completely pragmatic. I was like, well, is that something that people want? I really just want to make pens out of wood. Like if making a fountain pen, is better, then I'll try making a fountain pen. So I was in the process of exploring, like, well, I don't really even know how a fountain pen works. What are these all about? That was the initial curiosity, and how I kind of got into fountain pens was through woodworking and all that. I've talked about that a lot, but anyway, through that forum, they said, oh yeah, well, if you're trying to learn more about fountain pens, this really isn't the forum for that. You should go check out the Fountain Pen Network. So I discovered the Fountain Pen Network in mid-2009. It was like April or May of 2009. So I hop over there, and of course, it's just overwhelming amount of deep fountain pen knowledge, and it's a very different place than the hobbyists that were over on the International Association of Pen Turners. But of course, Brian Gray and Edison Pens was much more active over on the Fountain Pen Network. So I was really able to follow along and learn a lot more about Edison and their reputation on the Fountain Pen Network once I started spending time there mid-2009. So that's when I was like, I wonder if I could make fountain pens too. So I started messing around, making some pens. I was like, I really don't know. I never inked one up. That's a friend of mine who is also a pen maker that I met through the International Association of Pen Turners forum, lived kind of near me and was like, hey, there's this fountain pen show up in DC. We should go check it out, scope it out. I know a couple other pen makers there. Maybe we could see if there's potential there for us to make some pens and maybe sell them there the following year. And so I was like, cool, let's do that. So I went there, of course, was like, oh my gosh, fountain pens are amazing. And then that opened my eyes and everything. That part of the story I've told a lot. Let me get to the part I haven't told as much. So I had this big revelation. Okay, yeah, we got to get into fountain pens. Clearly there's a community here. They're going to love it, blah, 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 blah. Fountain pens are really interesting. There's a lot here. So I was like, we're going to start carrying ink and paper. We're going to sell my handmade Goulet pens, use the brand recognition of these reputable Clairefontaine, Rhodia, J. Herbin, all these other brands, carry those products on our site, SEO, and brand recognition and all this kind of stuff. People are then going to come to our site because we have all these products that they know and love, discover us, and then buy our wonderful handmade pens, and that will be what gets the brand off the ground. Well, it sort of didn't work like that. People came and bought all of our ink and paper, and a couple people bought some of my earliest pens, but they were like, oh, these pens are so heavy, these nibs are not so great. Can you offer this? Can you do that? Can you do da-da-da-da-da? And I was like, I can't do that. Like, people were asking for, commercially made pens, things that like would require completely different equipment. They didn't want pens made out of wood very much. They wanted other materials. And I was like, oh man, this is completely getting away from what I was trying to do. And really, at that time, in that late 2009, early 2010, my original vision of carrying fountain pen ink and paper so that I could then sell my Goulet-made pens was crumbling before me. I was like, oh my gosh, like no one wants my pens. They want ink and paper, so that's good. There's really cool stuff going on in this fountain pen world, but I don't know anything about fountain pens. For me to try to learn about fountain pens simultaneously and follow in Brian Gray's shadow and try to learn all this like more advanced equipment and different materials and all these other things with fountain pen manufacturing, which is outside my wheelhouse. I was a woodworker, so as soon as I step out of making pens out of wood, I'm kind of like learning everything all over again. And honestly, a huge factor of that was my name. I'm Brian G. Like, he's Brian G. He was like 3 or 4 years ahead of me down the road, was already building a brand for himself. I was like, people are gonna get us confused because our stories are so similar, and I'm trying to do the same thing as him. I'm not gonna be as good as it because I'm not, I'm a video personality, and I can do detailed work, but I'm definitely not like an engineer, and I'm not like a machinist, right? So like if I'm trying to get into like woodworking is great because there's a lot of handwork and creativity and stuff like that, and get into it. When you get into like machining pens, it's all about precision and math and consistency and all that. And I was like, ugh, this like plays to all of my weaknesses. This is not really going to go so well for me. I'm going to be fighting uphill on a brand. I'm going to be copycatting Brian Gray. I'm going to be outside of my wheelhouse in terms of the types of pens that I make. I was like, I got to figure something else out here. And honestly, it was just so coincidental that I read Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crush It, and I read The Dip by Seth Godin, which, Seth Godin's book was really kind of helped me to just make a very quick mental shift of like, it might be time. I'm either going through a rut that I need to figure out and then I can pull out of it, or I'm just going to get kind of stuck in a cesspool and end up running around in circles here and never going anywhere, which is kind of how I felt for the last 3 years at that time anyway. So I was like, you know what? There's much more of an opportunity to do this video reviewing, blogging, retail, online retail, and really focusing on that I was like, no one else is really doing that. You know, Brian Gray and other independent, Bexley was at the time, and there were some other independent pen makers that were doing some things, and I was like, I'm going to be kind of in their shadow a little bit. It's not really my wheelhouse, maybe not really what fires me up so much. You know, I've been kind of burned out with the 3 years of doing craft shows and having lots of people tell me that my pens were beautiful, but no one wanted to buy them. I just kind of lost heart after doing that for so long, and I was like, you know what, there's something new and exciting about this whole online retail thing. And it's super underserved. Like at the time, it was really, really desperately needed in the pen community. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about fountain pens, but I can learn, and I can do this in a way that I'm not seeing it done elsewhere. And even if I'm the only person doing it, I'm going to be the best because I'll be the only person doing it. So little nod. It wasn't anything specifically that Brian Gray did. It was just that he was living his life and doing his thing, and I saw that, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to really just like try to beat him out. Like, he's a really good guy, he has a good reputation, makes good products. And I'm essentially going to have to just pretty much copy what he did and then compete with him. You know, it's not what I'm going to do. But the really interesting thing about this whole story is in that early 2010 phase, I mean, I'm literally talking like months. Things were happening so rapidly at that time. In the early months of 2010, as I was still not really understanding the fact that my pen business was not going to thrive, but I had visions of it still doing so. I actually was in touch with Brian Gray because he is, he was able to supply me with some stock of nibs. And now part of when you're just upstarting, and if you know anybody who's an upstart nib meister or pen company, getting a reliable stock of nibs is tough because major pen manufacturers are buying nibs in huge quantities. To start out and make 20 pens, where are you going to get 20 nibs? Like, you need to buy nibs like 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 at a time. As an independent craftsman, that's really not sustainable. You spend all your life savings on nibs and maybe never sell that many in your whole lifetime. So Brian was kind of acting as like a sort of a broker to really small like craftsmen in the pen community for these nibs. So I had actually bought a stock of gold nibs from him that I was intending to put on my nice pens to kind of like step up my nib game and stuff like that. But that was in that early 2010 phase when we were kind of making a pivot. So I bought these nibs, and I actually never ended up using any of those nibs on any of my pens. So it's really interesting. I have a distinct memory of linking back up with Brian Gray at the DC Pen Show in 2010, which is the one show that Rachel and I were vendors at, just with ink and paper, had no pens at that time. But I remember kind of tucking my tail between my legs, humbly asking Brian Gray if he could take back these nibs because we had no money and I needed that money back so that we could buy inventory to continue growing the retail side of the business. And it was really like just one of the many nails in the coffin of my pen making days, but it was like long after the fact of like, okay, I'm admitting defeat here, but it was kind of like one of the lingering things that I still had, you know, thousands of dollars tied up in these nibs, and I was like, I really need to get this money back. So I was like, I don't know who has to sell these to. I was like, Brian, can you please buy them back? And he was like, look, this sucks, I understand. He's like, yeah, I'll work with you on this. So we worked something out, and he bought back those nibs. So there are very few nibs out there that are completely untraceable that both Brian Gray and I once had in our hands. So if you happen to buy an Edison Gold Nib pen in the mid to late 2010 era, you may well have one of those nibs that both he and I possessed at one point in time. I could never verify that though. Anyway, so that is why Brian Gray technically is one of our earliest vendors for the Goulet Pen Company, even though it wasn't for any product that we actually ever sold. So very humble beginnings there back in the pen making days, having to pivot hard. But it was really cool. Like, he was so gracious through that whole experience that I kept in good touch with him and good relations. And the truth is, like, he's such a generous person. Like, he admits that, like, Howard from Bexley was really generous in sharing his knowledge more in his heyday when Brian was kind of an upstart. And Brian has shared his knowledge with many other kind of upstart independent pen makers. So it's like, it's really cool just see on the kind of like the back end of the industry here, how generous many people can be with their pen knowledge, how tight. And you can see it when you go to pen shows. You can see how tight all the vendors are with each other, and everybody's going out to dinner together and asking each other how their families are doing and stuff. Everybody's really tight. And Brian was like that with me, and that was just like such a warm welcoming into the pen community, because really at that time I wasn't really dealing with that many vendors, so I was still learning kind of the industry, so to speak. But he gave me such a warm welcoming that I was like, man, I would love one day to sell your pens. And then in early 2011, you know, it was really one of the first pens we ever even sold, because it wasn't until September or October of 2010 that we even sold a fountain pen. So we started out with Platinum Preppies and Noodler's pens. But we were so just, you know, aligned with what Brian Gray was trying to do and grow and stuff like that. And at the time, he was working out of his garage. We were working out of our garage. Similar kind of stories, similar passion. I was like, Brian, I would love to be able to sell one of your pens. But he had never retailed a pen to another. He never wholesaled a pen to another retailer before, and never collaborated in that capacity before. He had only sold direct and done custom stuff. He had never done a production pen. He had never done anything like that with another retailer. And we had never co-branded or designed or done any type of exclusive product before. So in fact, the Edison Nouveau Premier in 2011, early 2011, that was the first. The reason we called it the Premier is because it was the first for him to do a collaboration like that. It was the first for us. And all of that stemmed out of a shared passion and respect that we had from a completely, really kind of a completely different business that transcended over into our new business model. So it was really heartwarming to be able to do that. And now reflecting, you know, 9 years later almost on that, we're still continuing to do that, and we are so much bigger now, and he's so much bigger, and I'm looking at, like, we're looking at each other's kids now, and our kids are like completely different people at this point. It's just really wild to kind of be able to grow up together in our businesses and our families and everything. So that's just a really cool, maybe not unusual. I kind of took it in more of a heartwarming sense than I did in like a crazy weird sense. But, you know, I've got a number of stories like that. But that one is definitely like one of the furthest back and most impactful for me. So it's kind of interesting. So, you know, not only have we been business associates, but we've been friends over all these years. And just as you would expect, being a member of the pen community, how you build relationships with other people because we're all here out of our passion, it's very much that way on the retailing, distribution, manufacturing side of things too. Most of the people who are there in this industry are here because they love what they do, and there's a heritage there, or there's a passion, or there's an interest, or there's something compelling about being there. So everybody's pretty tight. It's pretty cool. So there you go. My question of the week for you this week, to wrap things up, is going to be just kind of an off-the-wall question. What is the most recent pen, literally the most recent pen that you've used, and what ink is in that pen? Like the last one that you just put down. Maybe if it's not even your favorite, maybe you don't even like it, but just the last thing that you used. And I have to think, what is the last thing that I used? So to answer the question for myself, the last thing that I just used, so I forgot to grab a whole bunch of pens as I was starting out to shoot this video, and I had to write down a note so that I could tell Andy what footage to cut out here, 8 to 12 minutes, while I was standing up and grabbing pens out of my pen drawer. And I grabbed, I got this pen at the DC Pen Show. This is a Canalea pens, which they're also great pen people. No affiliation per se, but they're also great people. Support them. And I have, what ink is in this pen actually? Oh my gosh. Have I forgotten what ink is in this pen? Dang it. I'm failing. I'm failing on the pen front. It's a blue, no shock. Come on, Brian. You got to remember this. What blue did I put in this pen recently? I didn't write it down. I should have written it down. I'm failing. Anyway, it's like a royal blue. Boom. That's what blue I have in this pen. Oh, epic fail on my part, but there you go. So I'm curious to know what yours are. Be sure to leave it in the comments. Be sure to check out anything that I've talked about here on gouletpens.com. Like, comment, subscribe. That would really make my day. Thank you so much for watching, and ride on.